Okay. Hello, everyone who is on. So, I apologize for being a few minutes late. I was already a little bit late, a little bit rushed before, but I am. What happened was I have multiple YouTube channels. One for watching videos, for having just to not so they're separate, and I accidentally live streamed from that. So I apologize. Uh, but we're on now, 8:07, few minutes late. But we are here. So just going to give a little bit of time for the people who, were messed up from that to get on before we start. Yes, there is no guest this week. Had a little trouble securing one for this week. We should be back to guests next week. However, thought after 3 weeks of straight guests, maybe just 1 week, just me, would be okay. But we should be getting back to guests next week. We'll be starting momentarily. So, sounds on, all good. That was a little bit of a technical difficulty when I was originally doing the stream, so I think we're good. So, hello, ladies and gentlemen of Vanderbilt, and welcome to Terrier Talk. We have a huge week this week. Softball and baseball had a huge week last week. We'll be talking about that in just a minute. Big weeks. Track is starting. Golf has some big matches. Tennis has a big match against St. Thomas More. Softball and baseball continue big weeks after their big week last week. We'll be getting to that in just a minute. However, first, an announcement. I talked about this last week, and I'm talking about it again here. March 19th. March Madness brackets. I will be going through it Tuesday night, 8 o'clock. I'll be going through my entire tournament. I'll be previewing the entire March Madness. All 68 teams, all 67 games will be there Tuesday night, 8 o'clock. I'll go through my pick for every single one, why I think that. I'll be talking about a few different things outside of that as well, but that is the idea for Tuesday night, 8 o'clock, March 19th. Be there. It'll be a huge special episode of Terrier Talk. So, with that being said, let's talk about this week and what happened over the course of the week, over the course of Mardi Gras. So, starting with the softball team. The softball team had a few huge victories against St. James, against Academy of Our Lady, and against Thibodaux throughout the week before going into their tournament at the end of the week. Those games had the final scores of 7-2, 9-2, and 10-1. Absolutely huge. These teams had a lot of success throughout the previous weeks before going into the game against Vanderbilt in softball, and we looked dominant. We looked great. A great showing of improvement from the previous weeks and even from the previous season. Now, we did not have the same success in the tournament. We had a few close-ish losses against teams from Ascension Parish, and then a not-so-close loss against Santa Ma in the final game of the tournament. But I would say it's an overall success for the softball team this week. We went 3-3, but we looked great doing it. We looked absolutely great. It was a huge stride for the team. Baseball also had a big week last week. Also a great week last week. We had in our one non-tournament game a big win against just regular Plaquemine. Traveling to Plaquemine on Tuesday, we won 6-2. Then, in the tournament, that huge tournament against ULAB, where we had the very, very important task of showing Baton Rouge and showing University Lab what Vanderbilt sports looked like. We proved ourselves. We had a close win against Durham, and then we had what might have been a classic victory looking at the score, 11-10, an absolute shootout in the second round against West Feliciana. Then we went to ULAP in what might have been the finals. It was the final game of the tournament for us, and we won both of our first two games, so it might have been the finals against University Lab. We lost 7-2, but we went into it, and we showed through those first two games what Vanderbilt looks like, what Vanderbilt sports looks like, and what Vanderbilt baseball looks like. So great job to our Terriers for that. I think it was a very successful week for the spring sports and for Vanderbilt in general. So we're going to go ahead and move on quickly to the next week. So next week we start with tennis. Tennis only has one game from what I can see, but it is a big one. So our tennis team has been very successful over the last couple of weeks. Pretty soon I'm going to have someone on from tennis to talk a little bit more about the sport, a little bit more in depth, and hopefully that'll be a little bit more better at explaining and going to what the success of the tennis team is than what I can talk about here. But I can just look at the record. From what I've seen, the boys' gold team and the girls' gold team have both been so successful throughout this season. The boys' team only losing one game, and the girls' team, I think, being undefeated. Now, the one thing is, the one game that we lost was to St. Thomas More, another great team in the state. Who are we playing this week? Who's that one game on Monday? We're at St. Thomas More. Huge game. It's a huge game for state ramifications, for playoff ramifications, for everything. Two huge rivals in the sport going at it again in the regular season before a potential playoff match. So I can't wait to see it. It is going to be an absolutely huge game, and it is probably going to be must-see, both for the boys and the girls. Track also has a big week. Probably the busiest scheduled week of the track season. It's also the first true week of the track season, meets-wise at least. Of course, track has been having practices since late January, but this is going to be our first chance at a meet. We have 3 meets this week, actually, that busiest week I was talking about. We start on Tuesday, traveling to South Lafourche. It is our first meet of the season, of course, the Tarpon Relays. Then on Thursday, the freshmen go to the Tiger Relays. And finally, on a Friday, we go to South Terrebonne. So big week for track. If you want a little bit more in-depth about not just the sprinters, but especially the boys, a little bit more details about that, you can go watch my interview with Bryce from last week. It began the show. But just suffice to say for now, huge week for the Terriers and a great starting off week, hopefully, for the track team. Golf also has a few matches this week. The boys go to the Riverlands on Friday, and the girls go to Sugarland on Thursday. So that is, of course, hopefully they have a lot of success there in their matches. Baseball starts the week hosting Westgate High School on Tuesday. Their only non-tournament game of the week. It is probably going to be a win. It should be a win. It should be a very good chance to get our first home victory. This team, don't make any mistake about it, this team's awful. Westgate High School, they are 0-10 this season, 0-9 on the road, 0-1 at home. They have not had any success at all this season. They have looked absolutely abysmal, 3.2 runs per game. We only have 4.4, but we've had probably a little bit of stiffer competition. We have not. We've looked a lot better in our games than they have. Only 3.2 runs per game, no wins, 0-9 on the road. This is going to be a home game. Very good chance to get our first true home victory here. Going into that, we have another tournament this weekend for the boys, this time at Shaw. This is going to be in New Orleans. It's going to be a very similar situation that the tournament last week against ULAB was. That was in Baton Rouge. A bunch of big schools were there, and we had to prove ourselves, and we did. A very similar situation. It's in New Orleans, another huge city in Louisiana, and a bunch of big schools are going to be there. Shaw is a 5A school, if I recall correctly. And so there are going to be a bunch of big schools, and we're going to have a chance to prove ourselves like we did last week. So hopefully we go into it with the same mentality we did this week, and we go into it and win some games and go prove to New Orleans what Vanderbilt sports is, what Vanderbilt baseball is. So that's going to be, of course, the boys' task this week. Softball has a pretty big week this week as well, and they're going to be taking the main event slot for this week. So they begin the week on Monday, traveling to HL Bourgeois. Then the next day, they go to St. Charles on Tuesday. I'm going to go ahead and put these games together because they are very similar in terms of matchup. So what do I mean by that? Well, in both games, against St. HL Bourgeois and against St. Charles, we have similar records. Both teams are slightly below 500, but slightly above our record. They both are favored a little bit in statistics, runs per game, runs differential. Even our runs differential for our record is pretty poor. We're minus 19. A lot of our losses have been blowouts. But that doesn't mean that this game isn't winnable. Of course, it's a very close matchup in all of those statistics. So it's going to be a winnable game. It's going to be a tough game, but if we go out there and play like we did this last week, especially in the games before the tournament, then we should have a lot of success. So I hope that is the case. So very similar matchup, both winnable games. So that leads us into the main event. And the main event for this week is versus Edie White, hosting Edie White, another portion of the Holy War on Thursday. So, it's the Holy War. Once again, Edie White on one side, Vanderbilt on our side. So, Edie White's always going to be a tough out. Doesn't matter the sport, doesn't matter our record going into it. It's always a tough game, and this one really should be no different. Edie White is a very, very strong softball team this season. They're slightly above 500. They are 5-3. We are 4-7, but we've had a lot of success recently. However, they're a little bit weaker at home. They're only 500 at home. Excuse me. No, they're right above 500 at home. They're 3-2. We are 500 at home compared to our below 500 record on the road and in general. So we're a little bit stronger at home. We're normally at home, which means we have a little bit more of an advantage with the terrain. Of course, it's a home game. That makes sense. Our only common opponent that we've both played at this point is Thibodaux, and both were pretty strong blowouts. They beat Thibodaux 14-4. We beat them 10-1. I think the difference between 14 and 10 isn't very strong. Both teams had a very strong offense that week. But I think the difference between 4 and 1 is quite noticeable. It's a little bit more noticeable. Even though Edie White beat Thibodaux by more than we beat Thibodaux, I think it's still important to notice, important to look at, that we were able to hold Thibodaux to a lot fewer runs than they were able to hold Thibodaux. So obviously we don't have a lot of numbers to go off of. This is only a few weeks into the season, but from what I can see, it's going to be a tough game. It's going to be a very close game. Another statistic we can look at, is the average runs per game. They average 7.5 at this point. We average 6, both against St. Charles and against HL Bourgeois. They also average a little bit. A few more runs per game going into the game than we do. A little bit of a weakness going into this week, statistically at the very least. However, that's not to say it's not winnable. It's a very winnable game, and it's going to be a very fun game to watch on Thursday. I cannot wait for it. And I hope everyone else feels the exact same way. I think it's going to be big. I think it's going to be a lot of fun to watch. So let's see it. It's going to be great. It's going to be another part of the Holy War. So, with that being said, I hope everyone enjoyed the show. It's a little bit shorter this week. No guest makes sense. And I hope we'll be back next week with a little bit more of the pattern schedule from before. I should be able to get a guest secured for next week. So, hope to see you next week. Can't wait. Same time, same channel. See ya.